In Europe, D-Day on debt is approaching. Tomorrow morning, our time, European leaders will unveil a rescue package designed to convince investors that the sovereign debt crisis won't become a catastrophe. They're planning a kind of insurance scheme with a special fund underwriting losses on government debt. But the atmospherics are worrying. At the EU summit, tensions between rival nations and their leaders have become public, and critics think they're devoid of a solution. Stephen Long reports.
It was the moment that said it all. Smirks and scorn as the German Chancellor and the French President respond to a question about Italy's contribution to solving the euro debt crisis. A rare show of unity between Germany and France, a worry for the world.
The risk is that whatever happens in Europe doesn't stay in Europe, that it affects North America, particularly the United States and China. And it converts it from what is a European problem into a global recession and potentially a depression.
The world's financial centres are sweating on the details of a rescue plan to be announced tomorrow. But at the crucial summit, the leaders have been sniping and bickering. And Germany, the richest European nation, the linchpin of any deal, was on the verge of cancelling the talks before they began.
Angela Merkel was furious. She was expecting the new guidelines for the European Rescue Fund. They were only delivered to Berlin on Wednesday night, only in English, no German translation provided. And on Thursday morning, Parliament was already supposed to discuss it. And so Angela Merkel was so furious that she threatened to pull out of the summit, and it took Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president, over an hour to convince her not to do that.
It's 2 years since the debt crisis began in Greece, and Europe's still struggling for a solution. But even at the 11th hour, at this crucial meeting, there was no clear plan, with various proposals on the table and no consensus.
Well, the proposal is to use a lot more money. Currently, that European Rescue Fund has just about 440 billion euros, but that's not enough, because they need about 2, maybe 3 trillion in the end. And so what they need to do is they need some financial alchemy to extend the operation of that rescue fund and reach that 2 or 3 trillion eventually.
That's way more than the money that they have in hand at the moment. As a result, they're trying all forms of trickery to make the money they have stretch a little further.
Part of the deal has to involve writing off vast sums of Greek government debt, then restoring the banks exposed to the losses.
The bondholders have got to take a 50 or 60% haircut, something in that. Let's maybe agree on that to start with and put that through.
But the titans of finance are fighting that, demanding smaller losses for private investors.
The banks are basically saying that if the losses are more than 40% of Greek debt, then basically it's not voluntary, and that will risk triggering certain credit insurance contracts with huge consequences reminiscent of the Lehman bankruptcy. On the other hand, the European politicians are saying that if the banks don't agree to a write-off of, say, 50 to 60%, then they will let Greece default with the consequences to the banks as they were.
Brinkmanship with the threat of financial Armageddon on both sides.
That's one way to actually express it, yes.
Bob Baur is an optimist who thinks Europe's troubled history will mean unity finally prevails.
We think there's quite a force there to keep the euro together and to keep the euro as a common currency. I think you need to maybe look back in history and understand the determination there. After World War II, after many centuries of fighting on European and English soil, there was a move to try and lessen that in the future, and one way to do that is through economic cooperation.
The stakes here are big. If the European plan fails, the risk is that nation-states go broke, banks become insolvent, the engine of finance seizes up, but this time with no backstop of government money to bail everyone out. What ultimately will this scheme do? Will it actually achieve the rescue intended?
No, actually it could make the situation a whole lot worse, because it means that it is now much more likely than before that even the big countries, the supposedly healthy countries like France and Germany, will have to pay, and they will have to pay huge sums of money. For Germany, we're talking about 211 billion euros. And that means Germany could be next for a downgrade, and Germany could even eventually default.
Will it work?
No. I just believe that the Europeans have let this fester for far too long. All these proposals would have worked 20 months ago. Now we are faced with enormous problems and no political willingness to absorb the level of commitments on the part of Germany, France, Belgium, etc., to actually save these countries.